Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Alright guys, I've got another cool classic bike review for you. This time it is a 1985 through 1986 Kawasaki Eliminator 900. In this video I'm going to give a little bit of the history of the Kawasaki ZL900 Eliminator. I'll also talk about how the Eliminator compared to the competition that it faced in the mid-80s, and that includes Honda's V65 Magna, the Yamaha V-Max, and Suzuki's 1200 Madura. I've owned those muscle cruisers as well, and so I can speak from experience as to the differences between the different bikes. I'll also talk about the specs of the 900 Eliminator, and in a little bit I'm going to gear up. We'll take the Eliminator out on the road to see what it's like to ride. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. Looking at the history of the ZL900 Eliminator, in 1983, Honda really rocked the motorcycling world with their V65 Magna. It was an 1100cc liquid-cooled V4 powered cruiser, and it was actually the quickest production motorcycle in the quarter mile at the time of its debut. The V65 was an initial sales success, and so Kawasaki and Yamaha and Suzuki all developed muscle cruisers of their own to kind of cash in on that muscle cruiser craze. While Yamaha and Suzuki sought to emulate Honda by using a large displacement liquid-cooled V4, Kawasaki really went its own direction with the Eliminator, and there's a lot of things about this bike that really separate it from the other three muscle cruisers of the time. Looking at the specs of the bike, Kawasaki chose to use the 908cc liquid-cooled 16-valve inline 4-cylinder motor that they had previously used in the 900 Ninja. When used as a power plant in the Eliminator, Kawasaki revised the cams on the bike to give a little bit less duration and a little bit less lift, and they also went with 2mm smaller CV-type carburetors. They went from the 34mm on the Ninja down to a 32mm carb on the Eliminator. While this knocked about 5 horsepower off of the maximum output of the engine, it moved the meat of the power band into a much more streetable RPM range. And if you would ride the Eliminator back-to-back with the Kawasaki 900 Ninja, the Eliminator feels much stronger, up to about 8,000 RPM, and it has more horsepower and more torque over most of the RPM range. The engine featured an 11:1 compression ratio, and it was mated to a beefy 6-speed transmission. In the Eliminator, the 6-speed transmission featured a beefed-up clutch for drag strip launches. It also featured a shaft final drive. The clutch was also a slipper type clutch, meaning that if you downshifted too aggressively, it would help to eliminate wheel hop. Unlike the frame on the Ninja, which used the engine as a stress member, the frame on the Eliminator is a full cradle type frame. Kawasaki used rubber mounting for the engine, and it makes the power plant very, very smooth in this motorcycle. In the suspension department, the Eliminator features conventional style Kayaba front forks. These have air pressure adjustment and 5.9 inches of suspension travel. Out back, the Eliminator features dual conventional style shocks. These are air adjustable, and they also have a 4-way rebound damping adjustment, and you can adjust that by simply twisting the collar on the top of each shock. The rear shocks give 4.3 inches of rear suspension travel. In the braking department, up front, the Kawasaki Eliminator features big dual disc brakes with big single piston calipers acting on those. Out back, it features a large single disc brake with a single piston caliper acting on that. Looking at the Eliminator, it is obvious that it is long and low. It features a 62.8-inch wheelbase. It also features a very low 29.3-inch seat height, and that allows the Eliminator to launch incredibly hard off the line. One thing to note, the 160 series rear tire on the Eliminator at the time of its introduction was the widest tire fitted to a production motorcycle up to that point. Wet weight on the Eliminator was 567 pounds, and it featured a small 2.9 gallon fuel tank. And although the Eliminator averages around 40 miles per gallon in somewhat light throttle application, it can dip significantly below that. So it has a maximum range of about 110 miles, but it has a realistic range of about 80 miles until you hit reserve. I've hit reserve on this bike with as little as 67 miles showing on the trip meter, so if you own one of these, you come to realize the gas station is your friend. The styling on the Eliminator was another feature that really set this bike apart from the competition. While all the other bikes look more like a traditional cruiser with the pullback handlebars and the feet forward riding position, the Eliminator has a long and low drag bike look to it. The styling on the Eliminator was really meant to emulate the Kawasaki 1000cc drag bikes that had really dominated throughout the 70s at the drag strip. Performance-wise, a well-ridden Kawasaki Eliminator could clock off a quarter mile in the high 10-second range at right around 115 miles an hour. Top speed on this bike was right around 135 miles an hour. Because of its long and low stance, the Eliminator is one of the hardest launching motorcycles. It had the best 60-foot time and also the quickest 8th mile time of any of the muscle cruisers, and it was only beyond the 8th mile, beyond 100 miles an hour, where the Magna and the V-Max went on and bested the 900 Eliminator in the quarter mile. Both of those bikes posted quicker elapsed times and a little bit higher terminal velocity in the quarter, and that's really where their larger displacement engines come into play. Out on the street, a well-ridden Eliminator is very hard to beat in the 0 to 100 mile an hour range. It's a very hard launching bike, and it is just a thrill ride every time you throw a leg over one of these. They're very, very quick, and they're very entertaining to ride. If you compare the Eliminator to the V65 Magna, I like the seating position on the Eliminator much better. I feel much more in control with the drag style bars and my feet less forward in front of me. Although the Eliminator has a firmer ride than the Magna, it is much more well controlled in a sporting environment. It's somewhat similar when you talk about the Eliminator compared to the Suzuki Madura. The Suzuki Madura does not have quite the punch of the Magna, but I found it a little bit more comfortable and easier to handle in the corners. I thought it was a very nice riding motorcycle and a pretty good daily driver. While the V65 Magna and the Madura 1200 both feel more relaxed when you're riding them with plusher suspension, the V-Max is more similar in character to the Eliminator 900. It's very punchy, it's got incredible mid-range, and it's got pretty low gearing on it, similar to the Eliminator, and that means it always feels like it's just raring to go and a little bit edgy. The Eliminator is smaller overall and lighter than the V-Max, and I appreciate its handling characteristics. I think it handles a little bit better than the V-Max as well, but there's no arguing that the V-Max made significantly more power, and it is kind of considered to be the pinnacle of the mid-80s Japanese muscle cruisers. All right, enough talk. What is the Eliminator like to ride? I'm going to gear up, I'll bring the camera along, let's find out together. Let's ride.
That's awesome. I am currently riding Kawasaki's 1985 Eliminator 900. And one of the first things I noticed is that the seating position on this bike is quite compact. It has a low seat height, and consequently my feet are a little bit forward and a little bit kind of high. There's not a real long reach to the pegs for me. I'm a tall guy. But the handlebar layout is very nice. That is eager. Wow. The sound from that motor is just kind of a jet engine whine, and I just think this thing sounds fantastic even with the stock exhaust on it. This bike is a little unique in the indicator lights that are on top of the headlight bin, and then that's color matched to the bike as well, which looks kind of cool. The clutch pull is very light. This bike shifts through the gears up and down almost effortlessly. It's got a very nice shifting transmission. The engine in this bike revs very, very quickly. And even from lower RPM, this thing just scoots. It's got a very nice power band, very streetable power, very smooth power as well. This bike gets really, really serious above 6,000 RPM. And you definitely appreciate the low drag bars once you get it up into the meat of the power band. This bike is also very, very stable at high speeds due to the somewhat raked out front end and the longer wheelbase. The gearing on this bike is optimized for this smaller engine, and so at about 57 miles an hour I am revving 4,000 RPM. And kind of the consequence of that is it never really feels super relaxed. It feels a little bit edgy, and it feels like it's just ready to go as soon as I hit the throttle. For a bike that is long and low like this bike is, it really does handle nicely in the corners. It has a little bit different feel to it, and so you do have to get used to it. Being a naked bike, once you get up above 70 miles an hour, you really do start to get the wind blast. And like any naked bike, you would need a windshield or something to break the wind if you wanted to do some longer distance riding on this bike at highway speeds. But that's really not what the bike was designed for. It was designed to be a stoplight to stoplight hooligan, and it is very successful in that mission. It's incredibly quick. It's incredibly easy to launch this bike hard from a stop. And this is one of the few bikes I can lift the front wheel if I'm coming up over a rise and under power, but it comes up very, very controllably. The bike never wheelies on me unintentionally, even if I do launch it hard. By today's standards, the brakes on this bike are adequate. They're not stellar, but they were decent for the time period. I could improve these brakes by adding some Spiegler steel braided brake lines, and I may yet do that in the future. I'm getting very minimal vibration through the handlebars, but no vibration through the seat, none through the foot pegs either. This bike is very, very smooth. For me, this bike would be just about perfect if I had a little bit taller seat on it and a little bit more leg room and a larger gas tank. But as it is with that small gas tank, I've got to keep gas stations at the forefront of my mind when I ride this bike, and it really limits it from being a bike that I can ride for hours and hours and just enjoy it. And that's kind of a shame, because this really is a nice bike to ride. I can do speeds. I'm doing 60 right now, and it's very, very smooth, easy to ride. Although this bike does do a little bit of the shaft jacking, it's much, much better controlled than on the V65 Magnas or the Maduras. Weight-wise and size-wise, this Eliminator is by far the least intimidating of the muscle bikes to ride. When I get on this bike, I don't feel like I'm riding something that's a huge, heavy bike, or that it's unwieldy with the pullback controls. I feel like I can control this bike. I love the control layout with the lower bars, and it does make this bike entertaining to ride even when you're on a curvy road and not just going in a straight line. But it's entertaining in a straight line as well. And although it's not the quickest of the muscle bikes, it's definitely my favorite one to ride. The suspension on this bike is very well controlled. It is a little bit on the stiff side. If you get onto some really bumpy roads, it can get uncomfortable and hop around a little bit. But for most of the riding I do, it's certainly adequate. What a beautiful day to enjoy the fall foliage here in Pennsylvania. Absolutely gorgeous.
All right, man, I'm having a lot of fun. Every time I ride one of these Eliminators, I find that it is easier to be bad on it than it is to be good. This is just an exciting bike to ride. It's an edgy bike to ride. I love the styling on it. I love the fact that it feels compact and it's just always ready to go when you hit the throttle. The Kawasaki Eliminator was really unique among the mid-80s muscle bikes from the four main Japanese manufacturers. It's the only one of the four to feature radical drag bike styling. It's the only one of the four to feature an inline 4-cylinder motor. It's also the only muscle cruiser to feature a motor that's less than 1,000 cc's. And the other bikes in the category were 1100cc bikes and 1200cc bikes. It was the lightest of the muscle cruisers. It was the lowest of the muscle cruisers. It was the easiest to manage. It was definitely a very good handling bike on a smooth back road. The tuning of the engine and the gearing on this motorcycle mean that it is always entertaining, it's always raring to go, and it has such an aggressive nature to it, and I just love that about it. I do have several gripes about the Eliminator. First and foremost is the tiny gas tank on this bike, and really what it means is this is not a very practical motorcycle. It's a motorcycle that you hop on and you kind of go for a burn and then you come back and park it. The range on it means you really can't do any touring on it regardless of how comfortable you think it is, and I would have much preferred a larger, more real-world gas tank on this motorcycle. I don't think it would have hurt anything to put a larger gas tank on the bike. My second gripe with the bike is there's some driveline lash with this bike, on and off throttle. The driveline lash makes it a little bit difficult when you're in a sport riding environment where you're kind of hitting it hard and you're transitioning on and off throttle in the corners. Another thing that I've noticed on the Eliminator is that although this is a hydraulic clutch, my clutch pull and my clutch engagement point seem to be different depending on which gear I'm shifting into. So first through third gear, it seems like I have a consistent clutch pull. In the higher gears, it seems like there's a little bit less clutch pressure and that the clutch engages a little bit closer to the bar, and that makes it a little bit difficult to be consistent with the smoothness of my shifting. It's got fairly stiff suspension, and the nice thing is it makes it very easy to launch. It does not transition back and forth on its suspension when you get on and off the throttle, and I really like that. It's very well controlled and it's nice on a smooth road. But if you get onto some bumpy roads, it can kind of upset the chassis, and it's also a little bit less comfortable because of the stiffness of the suspension. I like the way the instruments are set up with the tachometer large and where I can see it at a glance. I love the exhaust note on the Eliminator. To me, it has one of the best sounding exhaust systems ever fitted to an inline 4-cylinder motor. It's just a thrill ride. It's an edgy machine to ride, and I love that character of this bike. It definitely makes it a special bike. As always, I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.